We are Friends United.
We are Friends United.
We are Friends United.
Together, we are Friends United.
I think for the Aboriginal community and the Mi'kmaq community, if they feel we understand them, at least even if we can't correct everything, but at least if we have sincere understanding of their journey and why things are the way they are, or they see the world the way they are, it's very different. And this facility is just, you can't come in here, in my view, without starting to get an understanding of the foundation of North America long before we came. I wish more Nova Scotians would actually take the time to stop in because, first of all, to walk in, the colors are just simply amazing. And then you look at some of the other artwork that is happening here. Some of it's obviously from Indigenous Nova Scotians, but there's some that's from Northern Canada that you see. It's just phenomenal.
What I love about this story of Friends United is it's one guy who happened to be an immigrant who said, I want to make a difference and I want to help and work with the Mi'kmaq people to bring back some of their focus on art.
You can think of Rolf in a lot of ways like a catalyst. And because of the work he did with the artists and the work that they've done, it's really inspirational, as Stephen said. When you walk in, you see all the colors, and it's instilled that sense of pride for the artists, but for the communities. And the more and more people that come through the building, the more the message gets out. Rolf has made sure to make sure that the artists themselves are promoted as widely as possible. And I think that's an important part of this.
I love the name Friends United. Once you are familiar with the place and the people, you understand how perfect that name is, because it really is a bridge in so many ways. Both between cultures, but also it bridges a lot of artists to their culture that they had lost touch with.
Political parties too.
Even look at bridges, political parties.
You can't come in this facility without start having some deep appreciation for history long before we were ever here. Because in order for us to solve and start the journey of reconciliation and healing, the Mi'kmaq have to feel that we are making the effort to understand the hurt, the harm. If you talk to the Mi'kmaq, they talk that way. It's not about what's going to be for the next 50 years. It's what the next 500 years look like. And if you look at some of the artwork in here, you see that.
And welcome, Kmaq. This is the Friends United International Convention Centre in Unama'ki, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. Thanks for joining us for the second annual Friends United Reconciliation Talks. I am thrilled now to be joined by two former premiers of Nova Scotia, Stephen McNeil and Rodney MacDonald. Rodney, we know your face around here. You've been associated with Friends United for about 12 years. And Stephen, I think this is fairly new to you. When did it come on your radar?
So I had known about it when I was premier, but my first visit here actually was post leaving office. I came here with the law firm, Cox and Palmer, and had a visit and blown away. It's a phenomenal facility, and to think about the amount of work that Rolf has done, to promote the Indigenous communities, Indigenous artists, has just been amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of staggering when you find out about it.
Well, you know what? I wish more Nova Scotians would actually take the time to stop in because, first of all, to walk in, the colors are just simply amazing. And then you look at some of the other artwork that is happening here. Some of it's obviously from Indigenous Nova Scotians, but there's some that's from Northern Canada that you see. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, all across the country. And you've got people like Jerry Sheena doing amazing carving, totem poles, the totem poles that are in the center. Rodney, you know as well that everyone who walks in here is struck by the beauty of it, but also the energy of it. But you know as well that this initiative has changed a lot of lives.
Oh, for sure. First and foremost, and most importantly, the artists themselves, who without them, this is not possible. And you can think of Rolf in a lot of ways like a catalyst. And because of the work he did with the artists and the work that they've done, it's really inspirational, as Stephen said. When you walk in, you see all the colors, and it's instilled that sense of pride for the artists, but for the communities. And the more and more people that come through the building, the more the message gets out. And it's not in the traditional sense like a tourism institute or something like that. It's of course it's privately owned. It's very special. But Rolf has made sure that the artists themselves are promoted as widely as possible. And I think that's an important part of this. Often as in government, as premiers or as ministers, you want to find ways to promote things. And I'd often be asked about First Nations artwork as a Minister of Culture. And I wish this opportunity had been there at the time, because it would have been something it could have pointed to. It's a great example.
Yeah, it really is. And I love the name Friends United. Once you are familiar with the place and the people, you understand how perfect that name is, because it really is a bridge in so many ways. Both between cultures, but also it bridges a lot of artists to their culture that they had lost touch with.
Political parties too.
Right. Even look, it bridges political parties.
But you know what? For me, you can't come in this facility without getting a better understanding by simply being in here of the Mi'kmaq culture. Rolf made sure the Premier's office had some art in it, but you can't come in this facility without start having some deep appreciation for history long before we were ever here. I was saying earlier to Rolf and to Rodney when I would be in China, the Chinese have a great connection to the Aboriginal Canadians because we talk 400 years, they're talking thousands. And if you talk to the Mi'kmaq, they talk that way. It's not about what's going to be for the next 50 years. It's what the next 500 years look like. And if you look at some of the artwork in here, you see that. You look at, have them walk you through a totem pole and the description of what each carving makes and what it's describing. So for me, and one of the reasons why I think it would be powerful for Nova Scotians is because it does give us a better understanding of the connection to our First Nations communities. This whole issue of reconciliation, in many ways, seems very abstract to lots of people, but it's an essence of trying to understand people and trying to put yourself in their position and where they've come from and why it is important for the journey forward. Is if I don't understand Terry Paul's journey, kind of hard for me to build a path forward why he might interact or why the Aboriginal community may act differently. It's because their experience is different. It's no different than we go in other parts of the world. Culture matters. I was saying earlier, if my father were come alive today, he'd say I look like him, but I'm not sure who that guy is when I start talking about it. But it's critical, and because it's an understanding. It opens up so many other opportunities. And I think for the Aboriginal community and the Mi'kmaq community, if they feel we understand them, at least even if we can't correct everything, but at least if we have sincere understanding of their journey and why things are the way they are, or they see the world the way they are, it's very different. And this facility is just, you can't come in here, in my view, without starting to get an understanding of the foundation of North America long before we came, that the Indigenous community was here.
I said to someone in these conversations, I feel like this is how it should be. We should have a sense of reverence for our Indigenous people in Canada. And she is Indigenous, and she said, but we don't want reverence. We just want equality. And I thought that, I said, okay, I'm so glad that you said that, but then it also enabled me to say, I feel like as human beings, we should all have reverence for one another. So it's, we should all just...
It's to me, it's the foundation of any relationship. If you don't have some level of understanding of the journey, you really don't have the foundation of a relationship. You may have transactions, but that's very different than what I would argue is a healthy relationship, whether that's individually or whether that's societal looking at it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And when you think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the truth part was about let's hear these stories and let's become aware and let's try to understand. And I know how, I think my experience is similar to a lot of Canadians, that there is shock and shame and embarrassment and some guilt for just awakening to it through that process.
Because oftentimes we I think go back to, because for many Canadians there's a goodness. There is a goodness in who we are as people, and you find it, the kind of things that you've heard would just go beyond your imagination of understanding. But the reality of it is, it's a lived experience by people that some of us weren't that, our ancestors, the transition wasn't good.
We lost touch with our goodness.
we did, but for many people today, it's very foreign to them. It's foreign to us. So it takes the ability to learn and be understanding and try to go back. And when you're asking the question, wanting to know the answer, even as shocking as it may be, some of the things that you would hear, like, the phrase and Dan Paul's, we'll take the Indian out of them. The language itself is shocking for most people, and it would be for me because it's not who you are. It's not our experience. We you go to school. There was you would just be interacting with First Nations, and they were. Oftentimes you didn't even think of them as First Nations. You just saw them as somebody you interacted with.
They're your friends.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not knowing, though, that their ancestral lived experience was very different than ours. And to me, that's the big... I go back to this. I still think in order for there to be any kind of healing, there has to be an understanding. I feel very fortunate to live in this province. And I'm not running for anything, so I'm not saying this as a politician. We're lucky in Nova Scotia. We have one nation, and we have a nation that hasn't been treated well, but a nation that's wanting to move forward. Other parts of Canada, there's many nations, and so we as a province have been given a unique opportunity, really, as a province with a willing partner to move forward and to acknowledge the wrongs of the past and then move. And it's not just simply to fix the wrong. There's so many. It's the foundation of everything else you do. The commerce interaction, the development of a community. How do you make all of the understanding of it? Just understanding the First Nations community. Things that we don't like. I always talk about this, Rodney. We did a policy around. We were looking at Children in Care Act, and of course it was developed by people who look like us. And good people trying to say, so we would take kids into care, and oftentimes we'd take them and we would take them out of their family because for whatever reason there was interaction. I didn't realize till I became Premier that would happen to my kids, but we also lost the understanding when we would do that in the First Nations community. We'd take them right out. First of all, we'd put them in a family that didn't look like them, but we also broke what is a tradition of generational support. Grandparents who is an important part in these children's lives. The policy and completely ignored it because we didn't understand it. And it was happening in African Nova Scotia communities. We do the same thing. There's this generational of family being connected. Was in many ways that policy was at the detriment of kids.
To your point, Stephen, and Leona Agluka brought this up yesterday and talked about the lens that a government makes their decisions on. It's so important that First Nations, Aboriginal people see themselves through that, and that governments make their decisions with that in mind and the lens. And when you were mentioning truth, I was thinking the word trust, which is the first part of, the beginning of that is part of truth is trust. And if we don't have the trust of the people, for example, in that policy, then you can't have truth. They have to trust you, and they have to see themselves in the policy. They have to, I used an example yesterday again at Wagatook at the court, and Laurie Halfpenny Macquarie and all the artwork that was surrounding it. And you were there that day, and you spoke very well. And it was, to me, if someone finds himself in the unfortunate situation that they're in that court system, they will look around the rooms and they'll feel that at least there's something that they see themselves there, and so there will be a better trust that they're going to be treated fairly and such. So I think all those things are important, and you can't really get to the truth though until you have the trust.
Your point of, I'm sure you would have said this in your premier. If you one of the things for us you have to see yourself in whatever it is you're doing. And in many of our institutions, there's lots of Nova Scotians who never saw themselves in them. And oftentimes, the justice system. Unfortunately, there are too many Nova Scotians, their only experience in the justice system is a negative one. Yeah. Because the justice system, quite frankly, didn't understand them. Yeah. And was built to discriminate against them. The day we opened that court was an extraordinary day. And but it was that came to me, and I give Chief Halfpenny Macquarie a lot of credit, as well as Chief Justice at the time, Pam Williams. I remember the meeting in the boardroom on the 7th floor, and they came in, and I think, why are the justices here? They want independence. Why are they here? What's this? They want to be independent from us. Anyway, I was so blown away by it because some of the Aboriginal chiefs were there, and the two justices were there, and they gave way in the room to the conversation of the chiefs to talk to me about their experience in the justice system, why this is important. And the justices really were just acknowledging this is important and we should do this. And they relayed their experiences, even to this day, the fact that they would have members unable to meet their court date for simple things that we may think of, or quite frankly being this intimidating thing called the courtroom. It was so, to them, to me, it's the way the system should work. I saw two. It's probably no coincidence they're both female judges too, so a lot better understanding. They stood there and they stepped back and they let the chief speak, and then they actually saw their own lived experience in the court system that wasn't doing what they thought the justice system should do for so many members of the First Nations community. And it was a powerful day. So to be there and have it open and have them all there, and
it was a fantastic day.
That was a great day. But it takes that, to their credit, the chiefs continued to fight, but the justices stood back and said, "Hey, wait a minute. You know what? This isn't working. No. This isn't working for everybody. Just because it feels good for me, it's not working for everybody."
And Friends United, of course, played a critical role in it. And so, you think about what Rolf did, the vision of bringing this together with the artists. So the artists may not have even realized just the impact the artist and Rolf and what they did because of that with the justice system and bringing people of different walks of life. Yeah.
70 pieces of art in the Gladue court. I want to ask you, how did you feel that day? Rodney mentioned yesterday, by the way, he was singing your praises. He mentioned that he had never heard
He knows
you
I'm not
speak.
running for anything now.
Well, he said he never heard you speak like that. How did you feel that day?
Oh, it was an emotional day. I actually was the last speaker, I think, and I have this great picture that Len Wade had taken unbeknownst to me when I was at the podium there was a young girl who got up and was dancing, and she's Donald Marshall's granddaughter, the picture, and I had, but it was a powerful moment. It was, to me, it was the way things should work. There was the justice system paused, said this has to change. Government listened with them. The neighboring Aboriginal communities and chiefs came and supported where we placed the court, as opposed, it wasn't in their particular community, but they believed this was fundamentally important. So it was phenomenal, and my hope would be that it was a catalyst for other things. I think Rodney's phrase, you need to see yourself doing something, and you also need to feel heard. And this was one of those times where I felt we got something right, where they felt heard. So it was an emotional day. Yeah.
Some people would say, like some critics might say, well, but it's still not Indigenous run. Danny Graham was here the other day, and one of the things that Danny said so clearly was that, reconciliation is not an end point. It's a journey and it's a process. And boy, that was an amazing example of progress. I agree with you.
So we appointed the first Mi'kmaq woman to the bench a few years ago. To me, it was an important journey in the next phase of that. We looked, it goes back to this concept, and I think it's really important to think about this. One of my sisters told me this 25 years ago, 30 years ago. If you never see yourself doing something, you can never aspire to do it. And, how many Aboriginal people have seen themselves sitting in front of a bench? How many have seen them in a courtroom practicing law, or putting on a uniform, or the list can go on. Every time you do that, you open up possibilities for people, because it's a question of them feeling heard, but it's also an opportunity to inspire others. And they want, we all want our children to have more than we had, and want to be able to strive to do more than, and not feel limited. And these decisions, that court appointing the first woman to Mi'kmaq to the bench, is just continuing down that journey. Wouldn't it be something that she gets to sit in that court? Wouldn't it be something that you have, Aboriginal justice or lawyers standing in that court? That is as much about the next generation of young Aboriginal kids. I would, I say the same thing about African Nova Scotians. Women, look at how far it was. I tell you, when I looked at the makeup of the bench when in 2013, I thought, my daughter doesn't see herself here.
What's wrong with this picture?
There's a lot of people who look like me. Now just imagine if I was Mi'kmaq, or if I was an African Nova Scotian, or if I was, a new Canadian. It doesn't reflect who we are. You don't see yourself, and I think
change happens over time, and if you don't take steps, it's not going to change.
Right, and
so those small, sometimes are, one step at a time, as they say. So I think Danny hit it right on, exactly what you're saying.
Well, I think what Ralph's doing here as well, it causes you to, and this is why it's, I was teasing earlier because I said I knew there was a group of retired teachers down here because had used it, but you need corporations here. You need people to understand, so when they go back to their place of work, that this goes with them. And if it's not necessarily the art, the spirit of what's here goes with them. So when you put that lens on things, you start analyzing this thing, and as you know, you can sometimes, there's all kinds of things that demand of your time, and you always look for what's some days that's the easiest path I'm taking it, as opposed to let's just wait a minute here. are we actually hearing everybody?
Yeah, no, for sure. And having different walks of life come through the door is really important. You know, there's the corporate, there's the teachers. We had a Kitchen Fest concert here in July. And so we had.
Listen, just because I'm not artistical, I know what a Kitchen Fest is. You know.
But so I myself, my cousin played at it, but so he's a professor at Cape Breton University. So he went back to Cape Breton University, of course, talking about that. We had Evans and Doherty, well, very influential in the music community, a lot of experience in Halifax, of course, but across internationally as well. And of course we had Morgan Toney and their band. And so for Morgan Toney to be here and now winning awards, the East Coast Awards, national upper awards, and different things internationally, as a young Mi'kmaq musician, we had him here. He saw people from his community reflected on the walls. It was a fantastic night. Brambria was part of the group that he's with. And, so you had traditional Mi'kmaq songs happening in a new way, in a new vibe, if you will, through their band. And, a young guy in his 20s. And so I think for him, this was a real experience. And I run into him the odd time. He still talks about it. And, so he's going to be going internationally talking about it nationally. I think he's going off to Paris or something, where to play for United Nations or something like that coming up. So he's, it's growing and growing and growing. So the message about Friends United hopefully will continue to spiral.
Our invitations to the Kitchen Fest must have gotten lost in the mail. I don't know. We want to come next time,
I need
or
a couple more
anyway.
dancers for next year.
Thanks for the heads up. I'll try to get in shape for that.
Steve and I, when you talk about that experience with the justices and the chiefs coming to you, that sounds like a moment to me of deep learning. Oh, right? Yeah,
100%. I mean, it was also kudos to both of the justices. Because if you were in the room, you had to take a moment to say and pause, not only to look at that experience, but to say, what else are we doing that doesn't necessarily, just because we're doing it,
right,
doesn't mean it's absolutely the right way to do it.
Leave our assumptions out of the room, sort of.
Yeah, and I was lucky to be around people who often told me my assumptions were wrong. So we did a lot of time of reflection. But it was one of those moments that I was privileged to be part of.
Rodney, I was going to ask you, as Premier, do you have a particular moment like that related to the Mi'kmaq people or Indigenous people in Canada where you went, okay, this is big learning for me right now?
I think when we brought together the cabinet for the first time with all the chiefs of Nova Scotia, which has become a regular yearly thing, and I think that's a great opportunity for both the chiefs and for the cabinet itself to hear firsthand from each other and to have open dialogue. And quite frankly, it presented an opportunity knowing that meeting was coming up, it forced the government to be prepared on certain issues, which over time could often be pushed out, to, they'll be dealt with another time. But you knew that meeting was coming up. And as you know, Stephen, when those meetings are coming up on a regular basis, you want to be prepared. Yeah. And you want to have something to say. And you want to have an answer if you didn't have an answer from the last one. So on my wall in my office, I have that picture of that first meeting. And for me, that's a very special thing. And with the chiefs, but also people like Grand Chief Ben Silboy and others that were there, and for some of them, they were also friends of mine. And whether I went to school with them, or whether I worked in in the communities or wherever it might have been. So a lot of those communities come from Cape Breton Island as well. So I would have dealt with them on different issues, whether it was the opening of the Member 2 Center or in other regards, or on the hockey rink. Yeah. And I it's funny when you ask about an eye-opener. For me, it was actually working in Potlatech in Chapel Island, which you'd only hear Chapel Island for me growing up.
When you were a teacher, you mean?
Yeah, as a teacher. And I had some experiences there which were beyond my belief as a teacher.
Can you give me an example?
I lost a student he was in grade 6. Yeah. And through unfortunately, through suicide. And that young boy, that, of course, as a teacher, that has a profound impact on you as an individual. And knowing the story that he had, and I knew it before that. But I often think of that young guy, Gwis Marshall, and he's one of those people that will always, have that impact. I think of jumping in the bus and going into St. Peter's and he teaching me the word I think it's lintuk. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, for deer, because we saw a deer. And he was, it's a real eye opener when those things happen, because it's real. It impacts the community, and from a faith perspective, I guess, and I see it in the artwork, and I saw it when this happened, that when someone passes on, the whole community comes together. The offices close, people, they go to that funeral, and it doesn't matter who in the community. It's very important. When I stop for gas, they'll mention that. Well, so and so passed away. That funeral's happening now, and so it's a different connection than in a lot of other communities.
Connection is, I think, such a powerful word in relation to Indigenous culture, and you think about the disconnection we, as a country, forced upon them. And in disconnection, there is fear, and in connection, there is that sense of, belonging and understanding. And it's what I think reconciliation, as you said, has to be about. Let me ask you this question first. How does being a former premier compare to being a premier?
Well, we can have an opinion now, and no one cares about it. I think becoming a premier, life changes for you pretty quickly, in the sense of, when you're in opposition, and I was in opposition, Rodney would have seen me there while he was there. Life seems pretty simple and simplistic. When you become a premier, you realize very, very quickly, simplicity is not part of the day-to-day life of a premier, or quite frankly of our province. And I think you carry that with you post, or I felt I have. I think, I don't want to speak for you, Rodney, but so I find, where we can play a role, if people ask, is really helping shape public conversation on all kinds of issues. I'm doing a little bit of talk on healthcare across Canada now, with the perspective of, my last 7-8 years, in terms of what the relationship with and I think it goes back to this relationship with our First Nations community, the Aboriginal community here in the provinces. It gives you the pause, gives you to take the pause to reflect a bit more on, on that journey, and what we can do, and how do we do it, and what's the way to go forward. Like, I don't know about you, it's interesting, I'm older than Rodney, but I know I don't look it, but I am older than Rodney. I was quite surprised at the level of how many, it's just residential schools. Yeah. Because it wasn't part of my life. Do you know what I mean? Where I lived, and really in opposition wasn't part of my life. Get to government, and you see the ramifications of and the hurt and the harm and the legacy of what that's done in terms of communities and families, and how do you address that? And so, yeah. Well,
it's one of the memorable times for me, Stephen, is actually you were premier at the time. You pulled together the former premiers. We had supper one night together at the old cabinet room in Province House, now the Veterans Room, and it was interesting because everybody's in the same boat, if you will, as far as, as former premiers. You yourself at the time were the premier, but it was a great opportunity for us to sit down together, something we never do really as a whole group. And so I really enjoyed that, including your
You knew one of them?
Your dad was there at the time. And for, as Stephen said, you know, now you can open the paper up and you can have your opinion on it, and no one else may even know what your opinion is, and but you may choose to share it in one way or another, quiet with some people, and to help shape things. And I think, you know, there's no doubt in my mind, if Stephen's part of a conversation, wherever it might be, in a local coffee shop, and they're talking about an issue that deals with the province, that, you know, you can add something to that conversation that is, you know, unique as a former premier, and you can help shape things in a lot of way. One of the things we did as former premiers actually was to send off a note to the province at the time of COVID, when you were doing premier. And as former premiers, we put something out together, which doesn't happen. I don't know if that's ever happened in Nova Scotia's history.
No.
But we put something together to send off to support the current premier of the day, which was Stephen. And given the events that were happening around Nova Scotia at the time as well, because we recognized that this was a unique situation, and there are times when we need to pull together.
How meaningful was that to you, Stephen, to receive that? Because you were under siege.
Well, and I also, so it was powerful in the sense of, because as Rodney said, it's probably never happened. So they knew where I was. And they also knew that I was in uncharted waters. And it was, I think it helped, well, first of all, it was, for me personally, it was a powerful message from them. I think it was also supportive of you know, our collective, we're in this together. And in order for us to come through this, we're going to have to do it together. And I would argue nationally, with the support of public health and all Nova Scotians, we came out of it better than most, and that certainly was a powerful message, I think, to Nova Scotians. This isn't a partisan issue. This is serious. This is life and death for some families. This is something none of us have ever seen. Coming from people who have sat in that chair, it's pretty amazing, really.
You know, I think it's clear that reconciliation has to be not a partisan thing either. And it's part of why Rolf really wanted to get the two of you together. He talks about it. It's about building bridges. It's between political parties even, and sitting down in friendship. When you describe how you understand the complexity of a province's issues when you become premier, I'd like you to tell me how your perspective that you gained in that regard helps you, or what lens does it give you on reconciliation in our country? What needs to happen going forward in your view?
I think in order for reconciliation to really happen, there has to be a lot of learning. There has to be a lot of understanding from all of us, understanding people's position and points of view. As I said to you a few minutes ago in our conversation, you know, there are many things that have happened in the lives of the Mi'kmaq that many of us in our lifetime, residential schools is not that long ago, but many corners of this province, you think it was 200 years ago. It's an unforeign concept, and so it's basically we haven't taken the time to fully understand it. And I would argue, until we do, to get a real understanding of the issues of how people feel about it. Because in order for us to solve and start the journey of reconciliation and healing, the Mi'kmaq have to feel that we are making the effort to understand the hurt, the harm, to acknowledge that a generation of their loved ones lost hope. And through it all, determination, they were bound and determined that their next generation wasn't going to suffer the same. When you think about that for a moment, that's a pretty powerful generation of people who said, I'm going to fight this, even though people don't want me here, even though they're trying to change what are my traditions, I'm going to make sure my kids understand this matters.
It's the definition of resilience.
And it matters. And I think those of us who haven't experienced it have to understand it matters. That's why we were talking, culture matters. It matters of who we are, where we come from, and that holds true in all of our communities. But I think it holds really true in the Mi'kmaq community. And understanding, I think Rodney's explanation a few minutes ago about what happens at a funeral. It's oftentimes how, kids are, grandmothers play an enormous role, and they're in their lives. Like, I would see my grandmothers, maybe, I might have, see them once a year maybe or something. In this case, in many times in the First Nations community, the Mi'kmaq community, that grandmother is a big part of their life. And almost parental.
It's like another mother.
Yeah, and understand that, it's, and I think our laws and our policies and stuff reflect that, but it's even, to me, don't underestimate the power of trying to learn and listen, and I think that will put us on a path of reconciliation. Listen, we have to acknowledge our ancestors' mistakes. We can't repeat them. That's our challenge. We have to call out the fact that there were racist decisions made. There were policies that were you can't even imagine that.
Abhorrent. Yeah.
Imagine the changes over the time in our own province.
Oh.
At one time, you wouldn't have been able to be the premier of Nova Scotia or me. As a Gaelic speaking person, a Catholic, you wouldn't have been able to be Premier of Nova Scotia, in the mainland of Nova Scotia. Imagine females not allowed to be able to vote. Imagine Mi'kmaq people not able to vote. All these things, the change our province has gone through over the years, and it's amazing. It's taken a long time. We have a long way to go, and a much deeper understanding is needed. I think about the thing that always comes back to me, even in this conversation nationally, and you mentioned that we deal with the Mi'kmaq nation here. We're very fortunate, but across the country, the issue of language is, I think, is one of the topics of conversation is going to become more important in the next 20 to 30 years, because when you lose that language, there's an old saying that a culture without a language is a culture without a soul. And if you lose that language, you're losing part of the identity piece. So all those stories of the grandmothers, all those...
Oral tradition.
Yeah, you have to have that pride. So a young person that turns on the TV all the time, living in any community, including Mi'kmaq community, of course, if they don't see themselves and hear themselves, not just see themselves, they don't hear their language, why are they going to speak that language when they go to school? And so my fear, and I think one of the things that governments need to do and to work on towards, is to make sure that we don't, that we continue to have policies and work with Mi'kmaq leadership to do all we can to promote First Nations languages.
So to go back to your first cabinet meeting with the chiefs, you should be extremely proud of that. And there's a legacy associated with that. And really since that journey, every government has followed your lead. But how it's evolved a little bit has been the chiefs now take on a critic role. So there's an education chief, there's a energy chief, who would deal directly with their minister.
Oh, that's great.
So, but on top of that, and the current government announced recognizing the Mi'kmaq language as Nova Scotia's first language. Mm-hmm. That all evolved out of our understanding of your cabinet meeting that has worked its way through. That was Chief Leroy out of Eskasoni was the education chief and was moving with that. there is that, sometimes you make a decision and you're never sure where it's going to lead you to. But that is one where your first cabinet meeting was, I'm sure, by these chiefs greeted with, I think this guy might understand us a bit, or that's a level of respect. And that relationship has evolved over a period of time, and I think the acknowledgement by the current government with the language, it can really be traced back to your first cabinet meeting.
There we go, Friends United. Jason Lucas, who's one of the artists here, he has a whole room upstairs actually. Jason said in his conversation this week, he said, if every Canadian would take one of those 94 recommendations and do something about it, really pick one, just pick one. It was so powerful to hear him say that. And it really, what I love about this story of Friends United is it's one guy who happened to be an immigrant who said, I want to make a difference and I want to help. I want to help and work with the Mi'kmaq people to bring back some of their focus on art, and people like Loretta Gould, who didn't even want to paint, and he gave her supplies and convinced her, and now her daughter Cheyenne is 26 and she is a full-time artist. She is amazing.
I don't think Rolf fully understands just the impact he's had on these communities, on individuals, on artists, on governments. I recall when we met up in one government place with yourself and Daryl Dexter was there, and John Hamm and myself and Rolf, and
that's where the art came from. You brought gifts. You came bearing gifts that we put we put the art in the Premier's office.
Yeah, which is so powerful.
But that was what a great opportunity for us. Just to talk about that and to it brings another level of understanding and we can all I'm learning every day from this journey. It's great, and it's great that Stephen's part of that journey as well.
We've got him now. I think anyone who gets involved, anyone who comes in, then feels like, I want to be part of this. So thank you both so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. It's just, I appreciate the opportunity to come down. It's amazing, and kudos to you guys for continuing to make sure this center becomes and continues to grow and inspire people. And the fact that we're doing these talks, this is kind of, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the other ones. Just to be in this background and to be in this. There's something about the atmosphere that is pretty powerful. If we keep going, Rodney and I are going to be singing in Kumbaya.
Well, it's funny because
We're going to start our own party together.
Yeah, but then we'd be arguing about who's going to lead it.
You can. I'll give you that.
the FP party, former premiers united, FPU. Oh my gosh, I did say when I was speaking with Jerry Sheena and Rolf earlier, near the end I said, Rolf, you've put so much out into the world. Jerry was talking about how transformative his work is with artists. And I said, you've given so much, you've put so much into this. What do you get out of it in one word? And he was kind of taken aback because he was ready to, I think, come hit me with the whole answer. And he just looked at me and he said, love. And that's it. That's what you feel here. Yeah. So thanks for being part of the love.
Healing, thank you. Yeah.
And healing.
We are Friends United.
We are Friends United.
We are Friends United.
Together, we are Friends United.